beneath an endless sky, wild and beautiful in a way that could make a man feel powerful one moment and painfully alone the next. Luke Carter knew that feeling better than most. At 34 years old, Luke had built a life many men envied. His ranch covered thousands of acres of valuable grazing land. His cattle were among the finest in the territory. Townsfolk spoke his name with respect, and travelers often recognized him before they even shook his hand. Years earlier, his reputation as a skilled gunman had spread across Wyoming, though Luke had never sought fame. He had simply done what was necessary when trouble found its way to innocent people. Now those dangerous years were mostly behind him. His ranch prospered. His finances were secure. His future seemed certain, yet every evening when the work was done and the ranch house grew quiet, an uncomfortable emptiness settled over him. The large dining table sat half unused. The rocking chair beside the fireplace remained empty. No voice greeted him at the end of a long day. No laughter filled the rooms. Success had given him comfort, but it had not given him companionship. That loneliness was what had led him to answer a mail-order marriage advertisement nearly a year earlier. The letters had started cautiously. Luke had never been particularly skilled with words, but writing gave him time to express thoughts he rarely shared aloud. To his surprise, the woman who replied seemed to understand him immediately. Her name was Eron Hayes. She lived in the East and worked as a teacher. Her letters were thoughtful, intelligent, and warm. She asked questions that nobody else had ever asked him. Instead of focusing on his reputation, she wanted to know about the land, the seasons, and the dreams he still carried despite his success. With every letter, Luke found himself looking forward to the next. He imagined her often. In his mind, Eron was graceful and elegant. He pictured a beautiful woman with perfect manners and a gentle smile. He imagined her stepping into his ranch house and instantly making it feel like a home. By the time their 11th letter arrived, Luke believed he knew exactly who she was. Eventually, they exchanged photographs. The picture Eron sent had been taken several years earlier. It showed a young woman with carefully styled hair and a pleasant expression. The photograph reinforced everything Luke already believed. When she accepted his proposal through the mail, he felt certain he had made the right decision. For the first time in years, he felt excited about the future. Hundreds of miles away, Eron Hayes sat aboard a crowded Union Pacific train heading west. At 29 years old, she had spent much of her adult life disappointing other people's expectations. Men back east had admired her appearance when she dressed properly, but many lost interest once they discovered she possessed opinions of her own. Some wanted a wife who would quietly agree with everything they said. Others expected admiration without offering respect in return. Eron had grown tired of pretending. Teaching had provided purpose, but it had not provided security. Opportunities for women remained limited, and she often felt trapped by expectations she never chose for herself. Luke's letters had been different. He seemed honest, practical, reliable, yet she refused to build fantasies around a man she had never met. If anything, she expected disappointment. During the long journey west, she repeatedly reminded herself of one important rule. She would never become someone else simply to please her future husband. If Luke Carter expected a delicate lady who agreed with everything he said, he would be disappointed. The train finally reached Wyoming after days of exhausting travel. Passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark. Outside, Luke waited beside the platform. He wore his best coat. A fresh shave made him look younger than usual. Beside him rested a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning. As the train slowed to a stop, excitement tightened his chest. Then the passengers began stepping onto the platform. Luke searched each face carefully. Finally, he saw her. The feeling that struck him was not excitement, it was confusion. The woman approaching him looked nothing like the image he had carried in his mind for months. Travel had left her exhausted. Loose strands of dark hair escaped beneath her hat. Her plain brown dress showed wrinkles from the journey. Practical boots peeked from beneath her skirt. She carried her own luggage with determined independence. There was nothing delicate about her, nothing elegant, nothing remotely close to the woman he thought he had been expecting. Luke's smile faded before he could stop it. Eron noticed immediately. She had spent years reading people's expressions. The disappointment on his face lasted only a second, but it told her everything she needed to know. So this was Luke Carter, tall, broad-shouldered, remarkably handsome, and apparently just as judgmental as everyone else. When they finally stood face to face, neither looked quite as pleased as their letters had suggested they would. "Miss Hayes?" Luke asked. "Eron Hayes," she replied calmly. He handed her the flowers. She accepted them politely but without enthusiasm. "Welcome to Wyoming. Thank you." The awkward silence that followed felt enormous. As they loaded her luggage into the wagon, both struggled to reconcile reality with expectation. Luke couldn't understand how someone whose letters seemed so refined could appear so ordinary. Eron couldn't understand why a man who wrote with such kindness looked at her as though she had failed some invisible test. The ride to the ranch only worsened matters. Conversation came slowly and awkwardly. Neither knew what to say. Neither wanted to reveal their disappointment. The vast Wyoming landscape rolled past around them, beautiful and untouched, yet the silence between them felt heavier than the mountains on the horizon. By the time the ranch house appeared in the distance, both shared the same troubling thought. They had traveled far, made enormous commitments, and placed their futures in the hands of a stranger. And both were beginning to wonder whether they had made a terrible mistake. The first weeks at the Carter Ranch passed with a stiffness that neither Luke nor Eron could ignore. They shared meals at the same table, discussed necessary chores, and exchanged polite conversation when circumstances demanded it. Beyond that, they kept their distance. The disappointment of their first meeting lingered between them like a closed door neither wished to open. Luke continued expecting Eron to complain about ranch life. The work was difficult, the weather unpredictable, and the nearest town sat miles away across open country. He assumed that sooner or later she would decide she hated Wyoming and everything connected to it. Instead, she surprised him. Rather than spending her days inside the house, Eron began paying attention to how the ranch operated. She watched the workers, studied supply records, and asked practical questions about cattle, expenses, and seasonal planning. At first, Luke found the questions annoying. Then he realized she was genuinely trying to understand. One afternoon, she discovered several bookkeeping mistakes that had gone unnoticed for months. Another day, she reorganized storage supplies in a way that saved valuable time during daily operations. The ranch foreman openly praised her efforts. Luke found himself reluctantly impressed. Eron noticed changes as well. The famous gunman she had imagined as proud and intimidating behaved very differently from the stories she had heard. Luke spoke little about himself and rarely mentioned his reputation. Most days he worked alongside his ranch hands instead of simply giving orders. When a neighboring rancher's fence collapsed after strong winds, Luke spent an entire day helping repair it without asking for payment. When a widow in town struggled to afford winter supplies, he quietly arranged assistance through the general store. He never spoke about these acts afterward. Eron learned about them from other people. Each discovery complicated her opinion of him. The man certainly possessed flaws. He could be stubborn, distant, and frustratingly quiet, yet he was also kinder than she expected. As autumn faded into winter, temperatures dropped across the territory. Snow began covering the plains. The ranch entered its most difficult season. Heavy storms threatened livestock. Supply deliveries became unpredictable. Every decision carried greater consequences than it had during warmer months. One evening, Luke sat reviewing inventory records beside the fireplace. A frown settled across his face. Eron noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked. "We're short on feed," he admitted. "How short?" "Enough to create problems if winter lasts longer than expected." She studied the papers. For nearly an hour, she reviewed numbers while Luke watched. Finally, she proposed a solution. The ranch maintained several separate storage locations across the property. By consolidating supplies and changing distribution schedules, they could reduce waste and stretch available resources considerably longer. Luke listened carefully. The idea was simple. The results were impressive. Within days, the new plan was operating successfully. For the first time since her arrival, Luke openly thanked her. The moment seemed small. To Eron, it felt significant. Their relationship began changing after that, not dramatically, not all at once, but little by little. They started sharing breakfast before the workday began. Occasionally, Luke asked for her opinion regarding ranch decisions. Sometimes Eron accompanied him into town. The conversations that followed felt easier than before. One snowy afternoon, they became stranded inside the barn while waiting for a storm to pass. With little else to do, they talked. Really talked. Eron spoke about her years as a teacher and the frustrations she experienced back east. She described social expectations that left little room for independent women. Luke listened quietly. When she finished, he surprised her by understanding far more than she expected. In return, he revealed pieces of his own past. He spoke about building the ranch from almost nothing. He admitted that success often brought isolation. People respected him, but very few truly knew him. Loneliness had become such a normal part of life that he sometimes forgot it existed until the house grew silent each night. For the first time, Eron saw vulnerability beneath his confident exterior. The realization touched her unexpectedly. As weeks passed, the atmosphere inside the ranch house softened. Meals lasted longer. Silences became comfortable instead of awkward. They developed small routines together. Luke brought extra firewood inside before storms because he knew Eron disliked crossing icy ground after dark. Eron began setting aside fresh coffee for him before dawn because she knew he started work earlier than everyone else. Neither mentioned these gestures, neither needed to. The kindness spoke for itself. The ranch workers noticed the difference. So did the townspeople. People who had expected the marriage to fail started reconsidering their opinions. Even so, neither Luke nor Eron openly discussed their growing affection. Both remained cautious. Both remembered how badly their first impressions had misled them. One Saturday, after returning from town, they found themselves sharing hot stew beside the fireplace while snow drifted against the windows. The conversation wandered from favorite books to childhood memories and forgotten ambitions. Eron admitted she once dreamed of seeing the Western Mountains. Luke confessed that he had always wanted a family but stopped believing it would happen. Neither noticed how late the hour had become or how naturally their lives were beginning to fit together at last. Then came an evening neither would forget. A fierce wind rattled the windows while snow piled against the ranch house. After supper, Luke attempted to repair a broken kitchen chair. The effort went badly. A support beam snapped unexpectedly, causing him to stumble backward. The expression of pure frustration on his face was so unexpected that Eron burst into laughter. For a moment, Luke looked offended. Then he started laughing too. The sound filled the room, warm, genuine, unforced. When the laughter finally faded, a quiet stillness settled between them. Luke looked at Eron. Really looked at her, not as the woman who stepped off the train, not as the stranger who disappointed him. He saw intelligence, resilience, humor, and kindness. He saw someone who had transformed his empty house into a home filled with life. For the first time, he realized how beautiful she truly was. Eron noticed the change in his eyes. The realization made her heart beat faster. Neither spoke about it. Neither needed to. Outside, winter continued tightening its grip across Wyoming. Inside the ranch house, something entirely different was beginning to grow. The regret that had defined their first meeting was slowly fading away. In its place stood trust, friendship, and the first fragile beginnings of a love neither had expected to find. By late winter, the Carter Ranch no longer felt like a place occupied by two strangers. The house had changed. The atmosphere had changed. Most importantly, Luke and Eron had changed. What began as a marriage built on uncertainty had slowly become a partnership neither could have imagined during that disastrous first meeting at the train station. Yet neither had spoken openly about the feelings growing between them. Both sensed the change. Both felt it. But naming those emotions seemed strangely difficult. Perhaps they feared disrupting the fragile happiness they had created together. Perhaps they simply needed time. The answer arrived sooner than either expected. A powerful blizzard swept across Wyoming during the final weeks of winter. The storm appeared suddenly, driven by fierce winds and freezing temperatures. Ranchers throughout the region rushed to secure livestock and supplies before conditions worsened. Luke spent an entire day preparing the ranch. Workers reinforced shelters. Feed was moved into protected storage. Every possible precaution was taken. By evening, snow covered the landscape. Visibility dropped rapidly. The world beyond the ranch house disappeared beneath a curtain of white. Shortly after sunset, troubling news arrived. 3 ranch hands had been checking cattle on a distant section of property when the storm intensified. They had not returned. The foreman delivered the report with obvious concern. "They may be trapped," he said. A heavy silence followed. Everyone understood the danger. Temperatures continued falling. A night spent exposed to the storm could prove deadly. Luke made his decision immediately. "I'm going after them." Eron stared at him. The words felt like a punch to her chest. No, she said. Luke looked surprised. We don't know exactly where they are. That's exactly why you shouldn't go. If I stay here, they might not survive the night. The truth in his answer left her speechless. This was who Luke Carter was. When people needed help, he never turned away. No matter the risk, no matter the cost. Within minutes, he was preparing supplies. The ranch hands offered to accompany him, but Luke refused. Too many riders would create confusion in the storm. One experienced tracker was enough. As he fastened his coat, Eron followed him onto the porch. Snow swirled through the darkness. The wind howled across the ranch yard. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Eron stepped closer. Please be careful. Luke's expression softened. I will. The answer offered little comfort. She watched him mount his horse. Then he disappeared into the storm. The hours that followed felt endless. Eron tried reading. She tried working. She tried convincing herself there was nothing to worry about. None of it helped. Every gust of wind seemed louder than the last. Every passing minute increased her fear. Only then did she fully understand the truth she had been avoiding. She loved him. Somewhere between shared meals, quiet conversations, and countless acts of kindness, Luke Carter had become the most important person in her life. The realization arrived with startling clarity. The thought of losing him felt unbearable. Near midnight, several workers gathered inside the ranch house. Nobody said much. Everyone worried. Everyone waited. The storm finally began weakening shortly before dawn. Gray morning light filtered through the windows. Then one of the ranch hands spotted movement outside. A shout echoed through the house. People rushed toward the door. Eron reached the porch first. At the edge of the ranch yard, several horses emerged from the snow. Luke rode at the front. The missing workers followed behind him. All 4 men were exhausted. All 4 were alive. Relief flooded through Eron so suddenly that tears filled her eyes. She barely noticed herself running forward. Luke had just dismounted when she reached him. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him. For a brief second, he looked startled. Then he embraced her tightly. Neither cared who was watching. The workers quietly turned away, smiling to themselves. The truth had become obvious to everyone. Everyone except Luke and Eron. Until now. Later that evening, after the rescued men had rested and the ranch settled into its usual rhythm, Luke found Eron sitting beside the fireplace. The flames cast warm light across the room. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Luke broke the silence. I kept thinking about you out there. Eron looked up. What do you mean? Every mile, every hour, I kept thinking about getting back here. Her heart raced. Luke sat beside her, closer than he ever had before. When you hugged me this morning, he continued, I realized something. Eron waited. I don't want this marriage to exist because of letters. His voice remained calm, steady. I don't want it to exist because of an agreement we made months ago. The room seemed to grow quieter. I want it because of you. Emotion filled his eyes. The woman who challenged me helped this ranch, made this house feel alive again. Eron smiled through gathering tears. I was so certain I'd made a mistake when I arrived. Luke laughed softly. So was I. The confession surprised them both. Then they laughed together. The memory of that first meeting no longer carried disappointment, only perspective. Both had been wrong, wonderfully wrong. Eron reached for his hand. I judged you too. I know. I thought you were arrogant, and I thought you were impossible. Her laughter returned. So what changed? Luke squeezed her hand gently. I finally stopped looking at what I expected. The answer touched her deeply. So did I. The silence that followed felt comfortable, certain. Complete, then Luke leaned forward and kissed her. The moment was simple, tender, everything both had been waiting for. When spring finally arrived, Wyoming seemed transformed. Snow melted from the plains. Green life returned to the landscape. The Carter Ranch thrived, so did its owners. Although they were already legally married, Luke insisted on holding a proper wedding celebration. This time they would choose each other openly. The entire town attended. Neighbors traveled from miles away. Ranch workers decorated the property. Music filled the afternoon air. Laughter echoed across the ranch yard. During the ceremony, Luke stood beside Eron beneath the bright Wyoming sky. He looked at the woman who had once stepped off a train and shattered every expectation he carried. Now he could not imagine life without her. When asked if he wished to continue choosing her as his wife, his answer came immediately. Every day. Tears filled Eron's eyes. Her answer was equally certain. The celebration lasted until sunset. Friends gathered around long tables filled with food and stories. The ranch house glowed warmly against the evening horizon. Months later, Luke stood on the porch watching the sun sink beyond the plains. Inside, Eron laughed at something one of the workers had said. The sound drifted through the open doorway. Luke smiled. He remembered the day he met her at the train station. The disappointment, the regret, the certainty that he had made a terrible mistake. Now he understood how foolish first impressions could be. The woman who arrived determined to be nothing he expected had become everything he needed. And in finding her, he had finally discovered that the greatest blessings often arrive disguised as our biggest mistakes.